Hey, what's up, AP Bio students? Hope you had a great break. Got some rest, relaxation. Now we started up again. And this week we want to finish off our botany unit with the tropisms that plants have. And actually, we'll talk about a few things within the next couple of days tropisms and then some plant hormones that we need to be aware of. So let's get right into it. I'm going to go really fast so you don't have to listen to too much. And I will also provide the PowerPoint if you just want to look at that. So here we go. Plants respond to four things: light, gravity, mechanical stimuli, environmental stresses. And we already know about transpiration in the transpiration lab and how plants respond to wind and temperature and humidity. Um, so those would be environmental stresses. Now we want to talk about how lights, they respond to light, how they have this built-in mechanism to respond to gravity, and some mechanical stimuli also. So let's get right into this. Gravity first. Gravitropism is a plant's response to gravity, and it responds in two different ways. On the root end, the apical meristems of the roots will exhibit positive gravity, which means they'll grow towards the gravity source, which obviously on Earth and on most planets would be the core, the middle of the planet. So that's where roots want to grow. On the other side of that, shoots exhibit negative gravity. So they want to grow away from the core of Earth. And they do that with statoliths, which basically will involve starch plastids that settle to the bottom of cells to induce a plant's ability to recognize gravity. The hormone involved in this is auxin. And auxin is a hormone when in high amounts will inhibit elongation of that apical meristem. Just some looks for this. I have a corn seed, and you can see the shoot and its negative gravity, and the root and its positive gravity. Then on the right, I have a picture of a forest. And interestingly, it looks like the seeds were maybe planted upside down or just fell upside down and had to do a little switcheroo as they started to grow to, to maintain the shoots and the roots in the proper positions. Next one, mechanical stimuli. Thigmomorphogenesis, big word, I know, is how a plant changes in form due to mechanical perturbations. And this one, thigmomorphogenesis, can lead to stunted morphology. And we know what morphology is. With the big one being wind. So, and this should make total sense. The windier the environment, the more stunted the plant. The less wind in the environment, the taller the plant will grow. So that makes a lot of sense, obviously. If you live in a very windy environment and you grow tall as a plant, there's a very good chance that you will be knocked down by the wind. And this little reaction would allow plants to not grow very tall. So some very windy areas of the U.S. would be the plains, so Nebraska, Kansas, where you really don't see tall trees, super tall trees in those areas. You are more likely to see shrubs and bushes and tall grasses instead of tall trees because of the too much wind. Whereas here we get some pretty tall trees because, yeah, it's windy, but it's not like it's constantly windy here in Indiana. Touch is another one, and I'll show you, or I'll talk about touch here in a second with another word. Here's a look. So believe it or not, the more that a plant is touched, the more stunted its morphology. The less it's touched, um, the taller it will grow. And excuse me, we call this stigmotropism, growth in response to touch. So tendrils and vines will actually seek out things to touch, and they will be able to wrap around those things as they grow. A great example would be pea plants, Mendel, where pea plants love to grab onto things and wrap around those things to grow taller. Another example is the Venus flytrap when it shuts down to eat some food. So it's stimulated by an insect, thigmotropically, shuts on that insect, and over a pretty long period of time will break down that insect with some of its digestive enzymes. Here are some looks at those. So I have a tendril in the left-hand picture, and then here's a plant that actually closes when it's touched, and then up here is the Venus flytrap. Environmental stresses, drought obviously is the big one, lack of water. Plants will wilt. It will keep their stomata closed. ABA hormone is responsible for keeping those stomata closed. Also during leaf shedding, or plants will shed their leaves during a drought so that they don't even have to worry about losing water into the air. Obviously, the big impact is reduced photosynthesis and diminished yields from that plant. So very common in more arid environments where plants will start losing leaves to protect themselves. On the left is what might happen in your home. I know for me, this has happened many, many times to the plants that I try to keep around. And then the Ocotillo plant, you can see normally in the desert droughts, it just looks like a dead twig. But as soon as it rains, you can see it grows the flowers and grows the leaves. Flooding, another environmental stress. The problem with, you would think like having a whole bunch of water would be helpful to plants, but the problem is when you have too much water, it takes all of the gases out of the soil. And one of the big things, plants need oxygen, nitrogen in the soil for growth, and especially oxygen to go through the production of ATP with cellular respiration. So some plants have adapted to this. The mangroves grow usually around on coastlines, so their roots are actually aerial to allow them to live in very watery environments. Other plants will produce ethylene, and that will kill cells and allow oxygen into the plant. Ethylene, of note, is also one of the main hormones involved in the maturation of fruits. So like the ripening of a banana, ethylene would be responsible for that. Here's a picture of some mangroves and living in salt water. And speaking of salts, we do obviously have saltwater plants that have adjusted and adapted to that environment. They have lower water potential, and it could to try to prevent sodium toxicity, they will not take up as much water. However, most plants die in that situation. Like if you put salt water on your plant at home, it will not live. The halophytes can tolerate salt. Heat, the last one, obviously, denaturation of enzymes would be the big one. Same thing that could happen to us when we have high fevers. Transpiration actually helps cool a plant down. So as plants lose gases out of their stomata, it's kind of like sweating for us, where we're cooled down by sweat. Plants, same thing. They're cooled down when they lose those gases. Above 40 degrees Celsius, so that's like 100 degrees. Heat shock proteins are produced. When it's cold, in frosts in fall and spring, that can have an adverse impact on plants, especially the leaves and fruits. It could lead to a loss of membrane fluidity. So, a lot of plants will put more unsaturated fatty acids in their membranes. Remember, unsaturated fatty acids are liquids at room temp, so they would be able to handle that change in temp much better than saturated fatty acids. Also, more sugar in cells helps prevent freezing, which is why you'll see plants put a lot. They'll make all that sugar all summer and all fall, and then they'll store the sugar in their cells so that the plants will not freeze during the wintertime. Defense against herbivores and pathogens. So obviously, a lot of plants have thorns and stickers that will prevent herbivores from getting in and eating those plants. Plants have a physical barrier, the epidermis. Some plants, as soon as a herbivore starts eating, whether it's an insect or an animal, they will start to produce chemicals that do not taste good to the animal or the insect. So a lot of plants are willing to sacrifice a few leaves to an animal to save the rest of the leaves. And then in some situations, plants actually recruit other animals to come in and go after organisms. So let's say a caterpillar is chomping on some leaves. Plants will actually release chemicals into the air that draw wasps in to eat the caterpillars that are eating the leaves of the plant. So here's a good example of that, where this plant is sacrificing to, it looks like, to some June bugs, which are common around here. And June bugs can really wipe out plants. Some plants have ways to get rid of those June bugs. All right, there you go. That's plant tropism. If you have any questions, let me know.